So Florida economy, it's grown exponentially over the years, but so has the cost of living. What is your plan to ensure that moving forward, I know you're going into your last year, that Florida remains a competitive destination for legal business and migration while the nation debates mainly on the enforcement? How do we make that happen moving forward?
Well, so, I mean, one, just in terms of the economy, we've been ranked #1 economy 3 years in a row by CNBC. You go back 20 years, 10, no one would have said Florida would be ranked #1 in economy, right? I mean, we had other states that were that. So you've seen a real significant shift in the diversity of Florida's economy. Obviously, we've attracted business, but so we lead the nation in new business formations. So there's a good story to be told there. Now, what happened? Part of it was because we went counter narrative in COVID. And so people said, hey, I'm going to escape to the free state of Florida. It's open. I did that. So businesses moved. And then there were other reasons too, but you had that. And so we handled that appropriately, and states better off for it. But what happened during COVID and beyond was a massive gusher of federal borrowing and spending, and the Federal Reserve having very loose policies. That has really led to a 40-year high in inflation. And although inflation rate is now lower than it was at the peak of Biden, you don't get the old prices back. If you have 7%, 9%, 4%, that's cumulative. And so what's happened is the cost of things for individuals, and this is not just in Florida, this is nationwide, the cost of things have gone up faster than their incomes have gone up. So what have we done? Well, one, we have now made all baby items tax-free. It's hard raising kids. Sometimes people don't want to raise kids because they're worried about the financial. Wipes, diapers, all this stuff, all tax-free. Now, I didn't do that. We didn't have inflation when in my first couple years, and then the inflation really happened nationwide after that. And so we were able to get it done just as my youngest was getting out of diapers. And so we literally, my wife's like, you should have done that your first year. You would have saved a lot of money. So
yeah, you should have, because I had to deal with that too.
So we did do that. That helps families. We've had massive tax cuts for a variety of reasons, put more money in the pocket. And it's everything from getting rid of the business rent tax, which is more of an economy-wide thing, to doing things like, we did the toll relief where people got 50% reduction in the tolls. And so we've worked hard to do all those things. Tuition, in-state tuition for our universities has not gone up 1 penny since I've been governor. We have the lowest in-state tuition of anywhere in the country, so you're not breaking your back. And what's been the most inflationary item in the last 20, 30 years is higher education, not in Florida. So we've worked hard there. We've also worked hard to do supports for hurricane preparedness, My Safe Florida Home, to be able to help people for those things. So you look at now what people have to contend with. Man, I wish if there was something a state government could flip a switch and then to have, all of a sudden have grocery prices go down, I'd flip that switch. But we know that's a macro issue for the entire U.S. economy, and it's not unique to Florida. Another thing that is true nationwide that we've had to deal with is homeowners, if you look at what they owe on their mortgage, the taxes and the insurance are oftentimes now more than the actual principal and interest on the mortgage. So what have we done on that? At the end of 22 and 23, we finally got the legislature to do big insurance reforms. And insurance premiums nationwide have gone up 40% since COVID. Florida has obviously not been immune to that. And we had 6 major hurricanes in 7 years, which doesn't help things. But then we also had a runaway lawsuit culture. So you would have lawsuits where, I would be entitled to like 50 grand and they'd get a judgment and the attorney gets 250 grand. Well, how does that make sense? So that contributed to premiums increasing. So the legislature and we worked together. We did that. 23, we knew the reforms hadn't taken hold. 24, Florida had the lowest increase of all 50 states. It's going up 30% in some other states right now. So far this year, we've had 17 new companies join the market, and we've had, I think, about 40 rate filings for premium decreases. The fact that we didn't have a hurricane, that's going to be good news. And we're not only going to be, monitoring that, which the private companies, we think that you can build off the Citizens reduction. Citizens did do some reductions in Dade and Broward and Palm Beach, but I think you're in a situation you're going to be able to do more of those. So we're working on that. We're going to continue to do it. But what's the other big one for property tax?
Well, you're taking the words out of my mouth.
Well,
My next questions were those.
No. So, I mean, I think it's like people say, well, there's a philosophical perspective of, do you really own your home if you have to keep paying to the government? Because if you stop paying the tax, they can take your home. So that's not really true home ownership. So I think of all the taxes, I think it's one of the most ineffective ways to tax people. But what's happened is people who bought a home, 3 years ago, they bought it at a valuation that's a lot higher. So they're getting taxed more and more. So that's one way we can do. All these other things in the economy with private businesses, the government, we're not a command economy. We can't just say, lower this. The one thing that government controls is tax. Now, property taxes are local. We don't do property taxes at the state level. We're not getting revenue to the state government or the state coffers from that. That's local jurisdictions applying that and using it for local things. Listen to this. 2019, all local government property tax revenue for the entire state of Florida was $32 billion. How much are they bringing in today? $56 billion. So you've had a massive increase. Why? Because it's basically an unrealized gain. They'll go tell you, oh, you may have bought your house for $400,000. We think it's worth $1 million now. And even if you have homestead, it still goes up every year, and that's cumulative. So that's really pinched a lot of people. So what we've looked at in terms of this, and we're working on the actual proposal, which we'll do next year, and to be on the ballot in 26. And sometimes people will ask me, well, we'll just call the legislature in for a special session, just cut property tax or eliminate for homestead. You can't do it through normal legislation. It requires a constitutional amendment. That's why it's got to be done in November of 2026. So we're working on doing that. But basically, what we've found out, all the property tax revenue that goes to local governments, 2/3 or more are non-homestead residential or commercial. So if you're saying the homestead property owners, that's a minority of the property tax revenue that these local governments get. So we want to provide the relief. I think it's important, and we're going to work hard to get something that's good on the ballot, but then ultimately the voters are going to have to approve it.
And moving into the legislative session in a month or so, what are you had mentioned maybe putting a tax on Airbnbs, but what other options are there, and what would that look like?
Well, here's the thing. It's not that we wouldn't do any new, we're not doing any state taxes. We have what we need, we're fine. The insight is just if you eliminate tax for homestead, you can still tax the Airbnbs, because I think a lot of our constituents say home prices would be more affordable if you didn't have people buying Airbnbs. Now, sometimes they'll say one company's buying. It's actually in Florida, most of the Airbnbs are owners that have between 1 and 10 units. But if we're saying you as a homeowner, as a homesteaded Floridian, you're tax-free, but the investment properties can still be taxed, it's not us adding a new tax, it's just saying they can still be taxed. Local government will have enough revenue for what they need. You look at a place like South Florida where you're from, these budgets have grown dramatically, and then you've got people like Blaise Ngoli, our CFO, he's exposing $300 million in waste in Miami-Dade County, and we want to talk about Broward. We know there's waste in Broward. So it can be done for sure. And then so they'll have the ability to be able to get revenue from those sources, but your personal home, and just think about what that would mean for a young family. If you bought a house 2 years ago, you may have a neighbor that's owned the house for 30 years. You're paying way more taxes. Because if they got locked in with the homestead, it doesn't go up as much. The young family is getting killed. And it's like, I want young families to be able to succeed in Florida. So that's the one thing we can do through the amendment process. The legislature can't do it by themselves, and I can't sign a normal piece of legislation. But if you amend the Constitution, you can do it. And I think that'd be a relief to a lot of people.
Besides that, are there any other options that we can look at, or Floridians can look at to as far as getting rid of the property tax, if that happens, making up for that revenue? Well,
first of all, I think the insight of the DOGE efforts of local government is showing that you don't need to replace whatever, all of it, because a lot of this shouldn't be spent to begin with. They got a windfall from rising property values, and instead of cutting taxes for people, by and large, they've spent the money. But they'll have sufficient ability to be able to raise. Now, what I did say we're going to do, and I will put this in my budget, we have 32 fiscally constrained counties. Most of them are rural. You know, Miami-Dade, they can tax hotels. I mean, like they have foreigners that own property. I mean, they have a lot of ways.
That's a whole different world.
Yeah,
down
they have
there.
a way to do Broward, Palm Beach, all that. But you know, if you're in some of like the Big Bend and some of these counties, so we've calculated if you eliminated on day one, and this may even be phased in, but if you did it day one, all homestead taxes for property owners in fiscally constrained counties, you can make up for that. It's about $280 million. That's not a lot of money for Florida. So I'm going to put that in the budget to be able to give to the local, because it's harder for them if they don't have the economic base. But all the counties that have tourism and all that stuff, you know, I think that they're going to be fine. But we don't get sales tax or property tax revenue here, and there will not be any tax from the state of Florida. We don't need the revenue. We're not doing that, because I hear some people say, oh, they're going to have Florida's going to raise the sales. No. We will never raise the sales tax. We have what we need. We're willing to help some of the local governments as well, you know, kind of come through this transition. But we're probably the only state in the country that could do this, because we have so many people that visit and so many people that own property part-time.
You touched on the rising insurance rates. How do we tackle that, address that this legislative session? What are some solutions you can offer?
Well, first, I mean, we're going to block any attempt, which the House tried to do, to go back on the reforms. So they had a piece of legislation last year, and it didn't even get heard in the Senate, but by its own analysis would have spiked homeowners insurance premiums, basically by inviting more lawsuits. You know, other states didn't do the lawsuits the way Florida did. We've now done corrections. That's why you have all these companies coming in, and you're already seeing, I mean, they're announcing premium decreases pretty regularly now. I think the fact that we're out of hurricane season with no storms, I think you're going to see good momentum. People are very happy with the way the markets work. You know, one thing that I think some of these companies have seen is like Milton. They said it was going to be like the morning after Milton. I'm on CNBC or something. They're like, Governor, estimates say it's going to be $50 billion. I'm like, how the hell would you know? Like literally, we haven't even been able to survey the damage, but they were predicting $50 billion. It ended up being about $5 billion. Why? I think part of it was our building code. I think our newer construction withstands this pretty good. So we're going to block any attempt to help trial lawyers and that would raise costs on consumers. I am going to replenish the My Safe Florida Home program. So that is, you can apply for matching grants to make home hardening improvements. And then as a result, you get a reduction in insurance rates. Another thing we're thinking about doing is right now for citizens, if you have a storm, you can go file a claim, get a result, and if you don't get what you want, you can go to the administrative judge, a DOA judge they call them, and you get a quicker adjudication. If it ends up in circuit court, I mean, it's just going to, county court, it's going to take forever. So we're working on maybe we can surge that in the aftermath of a hurricane for all claims and not just be that, so that people get quick resolution of that. I think it would be very good for consumers. But it's interesting, since we did the reforms, we moved from a litigation to a regulation model. So the enforcement is regulatory. And there have been more fines in the last 2 years that end up, the money gets sent back to consumers than in like the previous 20 years. It's been $15 million in fines and recuperation for policyholders. The other thing too is auto insurance. So because the litigation has gone down, these companies, their estimates were off in terms of how much they spent. So some of them are now required to do rebates. So Progressive just announced it's doing $1 billion rebate to its policyholders. State Farm announced a 10% reduction in its auto rates. And I think you're going to continue to see that with the major auto carriers. I think you'll probably see some more refunds where they're refunding the policyholders. But auto insurance nationwide has been one of the most inflationary items. In Florida, we actually had reduction last year on net, and I think this year is trending, 26 is trending in a better direction.